pick up pocket kings under the gun +1 not too long after. I raised to 30, the big blind is the only caller, we're heads up in position, the flop comes king jack deuce with 2 clubs, we've got top set on a coordinated board. The button checks, this may be too good of a flop since it's very unlikely that the opponent will have a king, with 75% of them accounted for. I check back for deception to possibly induce a bluff from the big blind. The turn is the 8 of clubs, there's a flush possibility out there so we no longer have the nuts. The big blind checks, we can't afford to check again, it's time to build this pot. I bet 40 for value. The big blind has something that he likes, maybe he has a jack or a high club in his hand, he calls. The river is the 3 of diamonds, it's a total blank, the opponent checks. It's difficult to extract more chips from the big blind knowing he probably doesn't have much, but I go for it anyway with a bet of 140. The big blind folds immediately, not too shocking. He's another friend of mine who's originally from Brazil named Breno. He's got an Instagram account worth checking out called Campello Vegas where he does great content. I show him that we flop top set. He'd tell me that our check back on the flop made us an extra $40 because he turned a pair of 8s and picked up a flush draw. In this one, we've got the jiggities and the big blind. Player in middle position raises to 30. The hijack calls. I'm on the fence between calling and 3-betting. The problem with calling is that we essentially turn our high pair into pocket deuces. Could be tough to win from out of position without hitting a set, as overcards will come out a high percentage of the time. We've got the 4th best hand in poker. I'm not going to play it wimpy. I 3-bet to 160. This move should allow us to win it immediately, but that doesn't end up being the case at all. The initial preflop raiser punishes me with a 4-bet to 400. That's incredibly annoying. We're probably up against aces, kings, ace-king, or potentially ace-4 or ace-5 suited. The hijack folds. There are 12 total combos of aces and kings. There are 16 combos of ace-king, and 4 combos each of ace-4 and ace-5 suited. When we look at it this way, it's a lot more likely that we could be up against a hand that we're beating or a slight favorite against. The problem is that if I 5-bet, we may end up getting it all in against a hand that has us completely destroyed. I call for 220 more to see a flop. Let's drill this one time. I wouldn't even mind if we have an easy decision and overcards come out. Instead, the dealer puts out 8-7-4 rainbow. We're a little in no man's land, not knowing if we're ahead or behind, but I feel decent about our hand. I check. There will be no check back from the opponent. He bets 400 again. He might do that with his entire range, whether he has us beat or not. Because of that, we can't let go. I'm contemplating a shove to deny equity from ace-king, but again, I don't want to get snapped off by aces and kings. I call to keep the opponent's bluffs in. It's unlikely that an ace or king will come out on the turn anyway. The dealer puts out the 9 of clubs. We pick up the gut shot straight draw. I check. The opponent has 1,080 in his stack. He's willing to play for all of it. He jams. I don't feel great about the situation, but best case scenario, we're ahead against ace-king, ace-5, or ace-4. Worst case scenario, we still have 6 outs against aces or kings. I make the call, hoping to see a 10 so we can beat everything in our opponent's range to win a huge all-in pot. The river is the 3 of spades. We break the straight draw, but we've still got an overpair. It's not good enough though. The opponent reveals pocket aces, not all that surprising. I probably could have gotten away from it on the turn. It's a tough spot, so I'm not beating myself up too badly over the decision. It had been about an hour and 45 minutes since the king's hand, so I was getting a little bored and impatient, which ends up costing me a good chunk of money. 3-betting pre-flop rather than calling results in me doubling up the opponent, who's playing somewhat tight, so with that in consideration, I'm even more unhappy with myself for making the call on the turn. 2 hands later, we've got ace-jack offsuit under the gun. I raised to 30. Under the gun +1, the button, and the big blind all call. We're going 4 ways to the flop. It comes ace-king-10 rainbow. We've got top pair and a gutter. The big blind checks. With so many opponents, I don't want to inflate the pot. I check for pot control. Under the gun +1 apparently likes this flop enough to bet into multiple players. He makes it 60 to go. The button calls. The big blind folds. We'll be sticking around. I call the 60 to see if we can improve. The turn is the ace of spades giving us trips. I check to the flop better. He's going to go for it again. This time he bets 200. Could have some hands that we're ahead of like semi-bluffs or worse aces. Could also maybe have ace-10, pocket 10s, or queen-jack for the straight. But we have removal to most of those holdings. In fact, there's no combination of ace-10 suited that the opponent could have. And I don't think that he would have called my under-the-gun pre-flop raise with ace-10 offsuit from under the gun +1. The button calls at 200. It's kind of scary. I'm starting to suspect that our trip aces may not be good, but I've under-repped the hand, and there are some cards that should give us the winner if we're behind at the moment. I call, rooting for a paint card. The river is the 3 of clubs. It's a blank. I check. Under the gun +1 isn't giving up. He bets 400. The button is done trying to hit whatever he was going for. He folds. It's more appealing to call now that I know we don't have to beat 2 players. I call, hoping we're up against a worse ace or a jack 10 type of hand. The opponent has pocket 10s for flopped bottom set that turn into a full house. It's another hand that I'm not happy with myself about. Should have been able to get away from it on the river, but I'm not playing my best, and it's causing me to lose extra money in spots that aren't necessarily easy. Still, when things are going well, I'm able to make more disciplined folds that I haven't been making today. We're dealt the jiggities again. We're in the small blind. The player in middle position raises to 40. The cutoff, who's a viewer named Joe from New York, who just recently moved to Las Vegas, 3-bets to 120. This is a similar setup to the previous hand. We don't really want to be cold calling 3-bets from the small blind. I 4-bet to 400. The hijack is like Roy Munson. He doesn't have a real hand and has to fold. The cutoff isn't as quick to let go. He calls for 280 more. We're heads up, out of position in a large pot. This would be a good time to drill the flop. The dealer puts out King 4 deuce rainbow. Ace King was a likely hand that I put my opponent on, and we're now losing to that. We can maybe get hands like pocket queens to fold if we bet. Plus, we could be up against other hands like pocket 10s or ace queen that we're beating. I down bet to 300. If we get called, it'll be likely that we're in bad shape, so I'll shut down. The cutoff does call. Now I don't want much else to do with this pot. The turn is the 5 of diamonds. I don't think that the opponent floated me on the flop without a strong hand, especially since I could have aces, kings, or ace king. I check. The cutoff does an inventory count and jams for 1480 total. I'm having a difficult time contemplating what he could be doing this with as a bluff. Maybe ace queen of diamonds, but that's only one very specific hand, and it still has plenty of outs against us. I fold. There's not really any other move that we could make. The opponent is nice enough to show for the vlog that he had me the whole way with pocket kings. He flopped top set. I'm surprised that he ripped it in with basically the nuts, but it was already a big pot, and he probably wanted to make sure I didn't somehow get there on him. About 10 minutes later, we're dealt the jiggities again, and the game is much tougher now. Remember the Spanish pros from the win that I was trying to avoid? Well, it's a slow Monday afternoon in Las Vegas with only a few 5-10 games running throughout the entire city, and the Spanish guys have made their way to my table here at Bellagio. I raised a 30 from under the gun. I almost don't want to see the jiggities at all because it's only caused pain so far. I keep running into overpairs and losing large pots. The big blind calls. He's one of the Spanish pros. We're heads up in position. The flop comes 10-6 deuce rainbow. It should be about as safe as it gets for us without hitting a set. The big blind checks. I bet 30. Nothing will be coming easy for us though. The big blind puts in the check raise to 90. I'm at the end of my rope. If we lose this one somehow, I'll be the next person to rack up any remaining chips that I have. There are plenty of hands that the opponent could be check raising with for value that we're beating, like ace 10 or king 10, and there are a variety of bluffs like gut shot straight draws that the big blind could have raised with. I re-raised to 230. I'm here to play ball. Let's get it all in. The opponent has a set. I'm going broke. I didn't start with that much anyway. The big blind just calls. It's a little suspect. He might be trying to trap me with a monster. The turn is the 9 of hearts. I don't like seeing it because 8-7 makes a straight and 10-9 improves if the big blind happened to have that. He checks. I have 940 total in my stack. I bet 240 to get a call or raise out of ace 10 or king 10 type of hand. The smaller sizing could also induce a bluff from the opponent if he has something like 9-8. The big blind raises to 560. It's the second time that he's checked raised us this hand. I told you these Spanish guys are aggressive. I'm not folding, but we could be drawing dead. I jammed for only 380 on top of the opponent's bet. He snap folds even though he was getting a ridiculous price. He must have had complete air. I'm okay with it.
Nice. I finally won a hand with jacks. It's nice.
It's the first time I can remember re-raising someone twice in the same hand. It's the first really big pot that we've won since arriving at Bellagio. I was beginning to lose all hope that we'd be able to claw back to even, but there's still a shot. In this one, we're dealt 10-9 of spades on the button. The straddle's on. The cutoff raises to 50. He's the only player that we've been able to beat with jiggities today. We could call, or we could mix in some 3-bets. These opponents are making pots big enough on their own without me adding to it. I call. The big blind is the player that we beat with queen 10 suited. He calls. The under the gun straddler is the opponent we beat in the previous hand with ace queen. He 3-bets to 340. All three Spanish players at the table are involved in this pot. They've teamed up to collectively get revenge. It's a smart move that they probably learned from Maximus Decimus Meridius. The cutoff folds, we're playing deep and are in position. I call to see a flop. I'm not going to let these guys push me around. The big blind folds, it's heads up. The flop comes ace 8-3 rainbow. On the surface, we've got nothing, but if you dig a little deeper, we've also pretty much got nothing. The opponent downbets to 240. He could have aces or ace king, but he can also have hands like kings, queens, jacks, 10s, and 9s that'll hate this flop. And what those hands will hate even more is getting called on the flop. I joked earlier about having nothing, but there are a ton of cards that can help us improve to a draw, like any spade, queen, jack, 7, or 6. I float, with plans to turn our hand into a bluff if the opponent checks to us. The dealer puts out the 7 of spades. It's the best card that we could have gotten, so we pick up the straight flush draw. Under the gun slows down and checks. This is our opportunity to win the pot without making a real hand. If under the gun has one of those high pairs below an ace, I don't need to bet much as a semi-bluff to get him to fold. If I had a strong hand like ace queen or a set of 8s, I wouldn't bet that much anyway. I make it 400. The opponent believes the story that we've got a monster as he folds without even thinking about it. We get the bluff through to get our biggest win of the day, and we do it with complete air. The opponent is a great dude who would later tell me that he had pocket 9s. If you replay the video, you can kind of make out the 9s as he folds. I'm now only down 1800. It's time to rack up a loss.